It looks from a distance like a festival built out of skulls, fire, and flowers. Streets fill with painted faces, giant skeletons tower over the crowd. Brass music rolls through the air, and candles flicker beside photographs of the dead. But that first impression misses the real story. Mexico's Day of the Dead is not a celebration of fear, and it is not a gloomy ritual about loss. It is one of the rare public events in the world where grief is given color, memory is given a place at the table, and death is treated not as an ending to hide from, but as a relationship the living continue to carry. And that is exactly what makes this festival different. By 2026, Dia de Muertos remains one of Mexico's most recognizable and visually powerful cultural celebrations, stretching across the country, but taking on especially dramatic form in Mexico City. Here, the broad avenue of Paseo de la Reforma becomes a moving stage of marigold orange, candlelight gold, black velvet, white face paint, and towering puppets that drift toward the Zócalo, the historic heart of the capital. Yet the festival is much bigger than one parade and much older than one city. In neighborhoods, villages, cemeteries, kitchens, and markets across Mexico, the same days are marked in different ways, each local version adding another layer to a national tradition that is both intimate and spectacular. The history behind it reaches deep into Mexico's past. Most historians agree that Day of the Dead developed through a long fusion of indigenous Mesoamerican traditions and Catholic observances introduced after the Spanish conquest. Ancient peoples in what is now Mexico already held complex beliefs and ceremonies connected to death, ancestry, and the cycles of life. Over time, those ideas blended with the Christian calendar around All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, creating the form most widely recognized now on the first days of November. So while many viewers outside Mexico see skull imagery and assume a kind of folk Halloween, the historical roots point somewhere much older and more layered, a meeting point between pre-Hispanic memory, colonial history, and living local practice. Why is it celebrated? In neutral terms, the festival centers on remembrance. For many families and communities, these days mark a time to honor relatives and loved ones who have died, to gather their photographs, favorite foods, flowers, and objects, and to create a setting in which memory becomes visible. In many places, November 1st is associated with children who have died, and November 2nd with adults, though customs vary by region. UNESCO describes the celebration as commemorating the temporary return of deceased relatives and loved ones. While Mexican cultural institutions also note that the dates align with agricultural rhythms, especially the completion of the maize cycle in many indigenous communities. So even at its most festive, the holiday is carrying several meanings at once: family remembrance, seasonal transition, community identity, and continuity between generations. And the people who celebrate it are just as diverse as the meanings behind it. In Mexico, Day of the Dead is observed by families in major cities, indigenous communities with their own distinct ritual patterns, neighborhood associations, schools, artisans, market vendors, musicians, municipal organizers, performers, and local businesses that transform entire streets into temporary stages of memory and commerce. Outside Mexico, the tradition is also carried by the Mexican diaspora, especially in the United States, where it has become an important cultural expression of identity and heritage. But inside Mexico itself, the festival still belongs first to ordinary people. Parents setting out candles, grandparents teaching children how to build an altar, bakers shaping bread at dawn, florists loading trucks with marigolds, and cemetery workers preparing paths for a night that will feel unlike any other in the year. The real story begins long before the first parade float moves. Weeks ahead of the festival, markets across Mexico begin to change color. Bundles of cempasúchil, the marigold associated with the season, start to pile up in dense orange mounds. Stacks of papel picado, the cut paper banners that flutter over streets and altars, appear in bright layers of purple, pink, yellow, and blue. Candles, clay dishes, incense burners, woven baskets, painted skulls, embroidered blouses, black hats, ribbons, and framed portraits all move into view at once, making it feel as if an entire country is quietly switching sets for a new scene. Bakeries prepare pan de muerto, the soft, often sugar-dusted bread linked to the season, while families shop for fruit, mole, tamales, chocolate, and drinks that may be placed on household altars or shared at gatherings. In workshops and homes, preparation becomes personal. Altars or ofrendas are arranged not as random decoration, but as carefully composed spaces of memory. Photographs are placed at eye level. Marigold petals may be laid in paths. Candles are set out in rows. Water, salt, bread, and favorite foods are added in many homes as symbolic offerings. Some families include clothing, toys, cigarettes, books, or tools that belong to the person being remembered. In public spaces, volunteers and cultural groups build larger installations with arches of flowers, paper skeletons, carved pumpkins, baskets of fruit, and painted backdrops. And then there is La Catrina, the elegant female skeleton now seen everywhere during the festival. Yet most people never notice this part. She did not begin as an ancient goddess or a timeless folk icon. She emerged from satirical art by José Guadalupe Posada and was later popularized further by Diego Rivera, eventually becoming one of the most recognizable visual symbols of the holiday. As the festival days arrive, the rhythm shifts from preparation to performance. In Mexico City, the morning begins with crews assembling barriers, sweeping major avenues, checking sound systems, adjusting costumes, and moving floats into position near Chapultepec. Vendors roll in carts of drinks and snacks. Makeup artists begin painting white skull faces on children and adults who wait patiently in folding chairs. Street photographers test angles against statues, trees, and the first shafts of light hitting Reforma. It still feels calm, almost ordinary, but there is tension in the air. The good kind, the kind that tells you a city is about to become something else for a few hours. Then the crowd begins to gather, and the atmosphere changes block by block. Families arrive with children in painted faces and flower crowns. Teenagers show up in tailored black suits, lace gloves, velvet dresses, and wide hats styled after Catrina imagery. Tourists line up beside locals who know exactly where the best views will be. Office workers step out for a quick look and end up staying for hours. Around them, the city's monumental architecture becomes part of the stage set. The Angel of Independence in the distance, traffic lights blinking above streams of people, banners moving in the wind, and the long corridor of the avenue turning into a river of anticipation. The waiting matters because Day of the Dead is one of those events where the mood builds slowly enough that you can feel the scale of it before anything actually begins. When the parade opens, it does not feel like a single performance. It feels like many Mexicos moving at once. The now famous Mexico City route typically begins near the Puerta de los Leones in Chapultepec and travels along Paseo de la Reforma, through Avenida Juarez and toward the Zócalo. Drums arrive first, then dancers, then giant puppets, then skeletal figures in impossible costumes, then floats carrying scenes built from flowers, candles, masks, and painted history. The effect is not just colorful, it is layered. Some sections feel carnivalesque, with explosive movement and oversized visual humor. Others feel slower and more ceremonial, drawing on regional clothing, indigenous motifs, funeral music, and altar imagery. What makes the experience powerful is that spectacle and remembrance are not separated. They move together in the same procession. Look closely at the costumes, and the festival starts revealing its vocabulary. White face paint is shaded with dark circles around the eyes and delicate black lines at the mouth to suggest a skull. But the styling can range from simple to astonishingly detailed. Some faces are finished with rhinestones, gold leaf, sequins, or painted tears. Dresses mix lace, satin, embroidery, feathers, and stiff petticoats that move like theater curtains. Men wear charro-inspired jackets, top hats, tailored suits, military looks, or regional dress transformed by skeletal makeup. Flower crowns frame faces in orange and fuchsia. Children carry miniature coffins, candles, marigold bouquets, or toy skeletons. Performers lift banners painted with saints turn neutral folk art, comic skeletons, and historical references. And everywhere, bones are stylized rather than grotesque. They are designed to be witty, elegant, even playful, which changes the entire emotional tone of the event. The flowers deserve their own scene, because in visual terms, they do half the storytelling. Cempasúchil, with its deep orange color and dense petals, is so central to the season that whole streets can look dusted in flame. Petals are scattered across sidewalks and altar steps. Bouquets are tied to railings and placed beside portraits. Arches of marigolds frame entrances, while the air fills with the mixed scent of flowers, food, and candle wax. According to widely shared tradition, the color and fragrance help guide the dead toward the offerings made for them. Nearby, candles add another layer of meaning, turning public plazas into spaces that feel softer and more intimate as daylight fades. None of this is random decoration. Each object helps create a route, a welcome, or a remembered presence. And then there is the sound, which keeps the whole documentary moving. Brass bands cut through the avenue with bright, sharp energy. Drums create the pulse that holds the parade together. In some settings, traditional funeral or commemorative music can be heard. In others, the mood lifts into brass-heavy street celebration, folk songs, and crowd chants. Vendors call out over the music. Children laugh. Camera shutters click. Plastic cups rattle. Somewhere, a grill hisses with meat or corn. At the edges of the procession, food stalls anchor the experience back to the body and the street. Pan de muerto, tamales, atole, esquites, tacos, candied pumpkin, hot chocolate, and seasonal sweets shaped like skulls or bones. The result is intensely human. It is impossible to separate the symbolic from the sensory, because remembrance here is expressed through smell, taste, texture, and noise as much as through ritual form. By the time the procession nears its peak, the city feels transformed. Reforma becomes a moving gallery of giant Catrinas, illuminated floats, smoke effects, dancers in synchronized waves, and performers towering above the crowd on stilts. Cameras rise overhead, children sit on shoulders. The late afternoon sun turns the marigolds richer, the makeup sharper, and the black costumes deeper. Then the route funnels toward the historic center, where the Zocalo often serves as the final emotional payoff. With a large public altar already installed there, the parade's closing does more than end the show. It redirects attention from movement to memory, from the thrill of spectacle back to the quieter idea that the dead are being named, pictured, fed, and remembered. But there is another side to this story, because the most intimate scenes often begin after the biggest public images are over. As evening settles, Day of the Dead in Mexico divides into different worlds. In the capital, plazas glow and crowds continue to drift through public installations. In other places, especially towns known for strong local traditions, the mood turns more inward. Cemeteries fill with families cleaning graves, placing flowers, lighting candles, arranging food, and sitting together for hours. In some communities, people keep vigil through the night. The visual contrast is extraordinary. One part of the celebration is urban and expansive, built for avenues, cameras, and civic scale. Another is close, quiet, and local, lit by small flames and private conversation. This is why it is misleading to reduce Day of the Dead to the parade alone. The parade is the most visible face of the festival, but the emotional center still lives in houses, cemeteries, and community memory. Some of the most interesting details are the ones casual viewers miss. One is that the giant public parade so strongly associated with Mexico City today is actually recent. International attention exploded after the opening sequence of the 2015 James Bond film Spectre imagined an enormous Day of the Dead parade in the capital. The city then staged a real major parade in 2016, and it has grown into a defining urban event ever since. Another lesser-known fact is that the holiday, recognized around the world as a national symbol, is also officially valued for its indigenous roots. UNESCO placed the indigenous festivity dedicated to the dead on its representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2008. And another detail, often overlooked, is that historical and anthropological accounts show the observance can vary significantly by region, with some communities distinguishing the dead by age, circumstance, or social role when assigning remembrance. So the festival may look unified from outside, but inside Mexico, it is a mosaic. That complexity helps explain why the festival still matters so much in modern Mexico. It is a major tourism draw, especially in places like Mexico City and Oaxaca, and it supports florists, bakers, costumers, makeup artists, guides, transport workers, hotel staff, musicians, market sellers, and artisans who depend on the season's economy. Local governments promote parades and public art because they bring revenue and global attention. But if that were the whole story, the event would feel hollow, and it doesn't. The reason it continues to resonate is that it also gives communities a language for identity. Schools build ofrendas. Young people paint their faces and post the images online, but they also learn family names and stories through the process. Designers reinterpret old symbols. Musicians blend traditional forms with new performance styles. Families who no longer live near ancestral towns still recreate the altar at home. Heritage survives here not by freezing in time, but by staying usable. There is, of course, a tension inside all of this. The more famous Day of the Dead becomes internationally, the more it risks being flattened into a single aesthetic. Skull makeup, flowers, a few dramatic photos, and a parade clip on social media. But the deeper truth is more demanding and more interesting. The festival asks people to remember specific individuals, to cook specific foods, to retrieve specific objects, to return to graves, to decorate homes, to tell stories about people who are no longer physically present, and to do that work every year. That is why even the most photogenic scenes carry emotional weight. Under the face paint and costume fabric, under the giant puppets and public choreography, this remains a festival built around the stubborn act of remembering by name. And maybe that is the most striking thing about Day of the Dead in Mexico in 2026. In a world that often pushes death out of sight, this festival does the opposite. It brings memory into the street. It sets a table for absence. It turns mourning into craft, color, food, music, and shared space. By morning, you see workers laying petals and adjusting banners. By afternoon, the city becomes a moving theater of skeletons and song. By night, the lights soften, the crowds thin, and the meaning settles in. What looked at first like a carnival of the dead reveals itself as a living conversation between generations, not a denial of loss, and not a performance of fear, but a reminder that culture can hold sorrow without hiding it, and can answer death not only with silence, but with flowers, bread, light, and the decision to remember.